Modi's maiden state visit. It was day 3. If you could quickly run us through what all happened, what was in the agenda?
So a lot happened. Of course, there was the congressional address, there was the state dinner, but I think what really drives some interesting news back home is the fact that the MoU has been signed between General Electric, GE Aerospace and the Government of India, and this is on an 80% technology transfer for the F414 engines. Now, why is this relevant? I think it's very important to note that our HAL autonomously, indigenously produced aircraft, Tejas, have been facing engine problems, and we haven't yet been able to replace our old Russian fleet of MiG-21s and even the newer MiG-29s. Now, Tejas, developed by HAL, is going to be a clear replacement aircraft for the Indian Air Force and be able to commence operations successfully deployed across cordons if the engine problem is sorted. And these engines and the technology for these engines are going to be provided by General Electric, GE, and that MoU got signed yesterday. So I think this is one real solid piece of good business and defense news coming in from Prime Minister Modi's visit. Now, in addition to that, of course, Amit will enlighten us more, but the next big thing is Micron setting up its plant in Gujarat, and Micron giving us that boost in the arm, that shot in the arm which is required for India's semiconductor industry.
That is correct.
And semiconductor industry has been in focus ever since the start of the pandemic, ever since supply chains got hit and China's zero COVID policy ensued. When we were completely dependent and at a loss to procure enough semiconductors, enough chips to go into electronic components or even to go into automobiles, cars, and the entire electric fleet that we want to develop in India. So Micron setting up its testing and assembly plant in Gujarat in India, 1100 crore rupees invested by Micron directly for a 2200 crore project, out of which the remaining 1100 crores coming in through the government's PLI scheme, performance linked incentive scheme, which is going to really give a boost to India's manufacturing of semiconductors.
All right, so it was the jet engines, it was also semiconductors, and important, interesting developments coming in there, as Kartik mentioned, an MoU that was signed between HAL and GE to manufacture jet engines, which basically marks a beginning of an important era of defense ties between the two countries. India so far, stayed away from having defense relationships with America to this extent, essentially because you don't want to develop on one country when it comes to defense procurement. But this is a significant era of development, and you had MoUs being signed and also promises being made from GE to Micron to a lot of other companies. Amit?
The big difference this time is, one, it is a victory for Make in India. These engines are supposed to be manufactured in India. So that is one big shift. Two, our problem with primarily the US when it came to defense was basically technology transfer. That has changed this time, whether it is drone technologies, whether it is jet engines. So that has changed. Another thing, what result in further Make in India in other fields is research and development facilities that are going to be set up in India by, let's say, even Applied Materials. There are talks of big investments. Of course, there are roadblocks from domestic players also when it comes to Starlink, SpaceX and Tesla. But that is in the offing, and the ground has been set up for those kinds of talks in the days to come. And close on the heels, Google, there's news at the same time of Google shifting a large part of its production to India following Apple. So it has been a very good trip when it comes to basically business is concerned, as far as Prime Minister Modi's trip is state visit is concerned.
Okay.
So primarily, I think we are looking at a juncture in India's history where India-US relations are at an all-time high. And I think especially in the case of defense procurement, we have thus far been fairly dependent on Russia as our trade partner. And the equation between US and Pakistan when it comes to defense deals has always been a highlight and a sore point for India as well. So the entire F-14, F-16 fleet is with Pakistan, whereas we have thus far been dependent on Russian MiGs and Russian Sukhois. So I think this all-time high of trade relations, diplomatic relations, friendly relations between India and US comes at a time where perhaps US is also trying to signal to Russia that your business in India could get impacted, and India is also giving a subtle message back to Pakistan and China and even Russia that we've got other friends too who can help us if required.
Right.
But most importantly, I think the whole drive of being self-reliant, make in India, and be able to produce our own defense equipment, our own engines, our own aircraft, comes squarely on the back of this technology of transfer. Remember, it's not a deal where you're going and you're buying a few engines. It's not a deal where you're going, in the case of drones, it's different because we are procuring the Reaper drones, but then eventually the idea is to set up the Reaper drone facility for the Indian Navy, the MRO facility for that, which is the maintenance, the repair and operations facility for the Reaper drones, which we are buying, also referred to as the Predator drones. So that is also coming up, but I think I'm most excited about the fact that it is a transfer of technology and not just a case of purchase. What happens there is your dependence on serviceability, your dependence on upgradations, maintenance, all of that reduces
Absolutely.
drastically.
Right.
So because you have the technology and you have the license to continue producing engines using that technology. So I think that is absolutely good news.
And you know, fairly, even before this visit, I think we all were aware that this is going to be about technology. This is going to be about procuring critical technology from AI to semiconductor to now defense. All of that augurs well. So if we were to sum this up, and I'd like to get Krishna here into the discussion. Krishna, if we were to sum this up, this is being seen as an attempt made by India to procure that technology, and some progress made therein, because you have an R&D facility which is likely to come in by the way of applied materials. You also now have GE hoping to bring jet engine technology into India, so make in India there, getting some sort of boost as far as day 3 and the overall visit of Prime Minister in the US is concerned.
That's right, Shweta, and Make in India, and more importantly, technology transfer. Technology was the main focal point of discussions, is what that's come out from the Ministry of External Affairs, saying that no, it was not in a limited way that technology was discussed, but technology across domains, from energy to space to defense. These three important verticals under which technology transfer, creating technology together, all of that has been discussed, and that is probably the biggest takeaway amongst all takeaways, if you ask me, from this historic state visit, the only Indian Prime Minister to address the US Congress twice. It's come at a time when, and it's beautifully, it was put across saying that, you have kids in India dressing up as Spider-Man for Halloween, and you have kids in the US dancing to Natu Natu from RRR. That's where we are at this stage in an increasingly connected world. And we are at the cusp of artificial intelligence taking over all of our lives. So it's very important that as far as technology is concerned, the oldest democracy in the world and the largest democracy in the world works together, because our future is going to be technology. And this particular meeting of Prime Minister Modi and President Biden was all about technology, is the inside information we're getting from the Ministry of External Affairs. More than 20 areas of cooperation in technology have been discussed. That's what we understand at this time. More than 20 areas. So we'll have to see how they end up as, MOUs and, R&D centers like Amit was talking about, which India, needs. I will wait for the outcomes of all of this, but I will be expecting a lot of tech outcomes, Shweta.
All right, so a lot of tech outcome expected there, but deals signed on papers versus Kartik deal materialized. I think there's a long road ahead for that. All in all, if I were to look at it, and from my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, this is more about signaling. This is more about India's soft power. This is about India asserting to the world that we have arrived. And especially when you mentioned China, you mentioned Russia, and you mentioned Pakistan in the state address yesterday, which was yesterday for us, but the third day morning for them, Prime Minister also hinted at cracking down on terrorism. So as to say, hinting at Pakistan, standing up and saying that this is our common enemy and we need to work together towards ensuring that we fight that common enemy together. So I think it was more about signaling. This is more about the signaling to the world as opposed to what we may finally get, because sometimes these deals never materialize.
You're right, Shweta. So I think 9/11 and 26/11 have been significant moments for the US and for India. Right, and that is where I think terrorism was taken absolutely seriously, and it was very clear in our consciences, respectively, as Krishna mentioned, in the oldest and the largest democracy, that terrorism is a common enemy. Of course, it's been 2 decades to 9/11, and it's been what, almost 15 years to 26/11. But we have seen and we have asserted our stand against terrorism fairly clearly. And I think this shaking of hands and a joint sort of address stating that we are together in our fight against terrorism is obviously a signal to all rogue states out there that that this is not a matter that is going to be taken lightly at all. But shifting away from terrorism, specifically in the case of business, yeah.
And I'm just as you were speaking, we saw those visuals, very interesting. Satya Nadella walking in, Sundar Pichai walking in, Mukesh Ambani walking in, all 400 guests invited from the business community to attend that state dinner.
That's right, absolutely. So again, we are looking at,
and that's Anand Mahindra there.
Anand Mahindra there. So we are looking at one point at US business coming into India. At another level, we are looking at Indian businesses expanding to the US as well. Anand Mahindra, for example, when the XUV 500 was launched, one of the target markets for Mahindra and Mahindra was the US. Now, when you talk about the oil refineries that Reliance owns, now, okay, we are still importing oil from Russia, but the refineries that produce the diesel that get exported out of the Gujarat Jamnagar refineries has Europe as the target market. So India is no longer just a receiver of doles or incentives or businesses coming into India, but pretty much an equal stakeholder wanting to even export its services outside of the country. And this, incidentally, now is not restricted to technology alone. And with, of course, we've seen Apple manufacturing in India. India's mobile smartphone exports to a tune of $11 billion pretty much suggests that what is made in India is no longer only consumed in India, but also consumed in other parts of the world. And for that, it's important for these kind of relationships and partnerships to get forged. But coming to your moot question on handshakes resulting into signatures, signed, sealed, and
deals
at some point to be delivered.
Right.
I think, yeah, there is a journey to traverse. It's not something that is going to happen overnight. It's not something that will happen even in a span of a year if you were to really, look at a short-term to medium-term impact. And these deals require a lot of negotiations. Srinath was on a show yesterday and he mentioned the kind of challenges that we continue to face on land acquisition, land reforms, labor reforms, skilling of labor, and then overall the ease of doing business. I mean, there are contrary reports everywhere where some reports released by the government of India suggest that our ranking on ease of doing business is improving. Niti Aayog backs that up, and there are contrarian reports coming from other parts of the world where they suggest that we are still stuck in bureaucratic hurdles. So it is going to be a long time, a long, slow negotiation process for any of these handshakes to really materialize into concrete business deals. So I think once you sign the MoU, the Memorandum of Understanding, it is pretty much only a letter of intent that we intend to work together. We intend to work together on such and such areas, and this is our expectation versus this could be your demand, and this is how we intend to meet. So it is pretty much a letter of intent, a memorandum of understanding, and not really a signed contract. The signing of contracts still, so for example, HAL did not comment yesterday anything more than suggesting that we are still waiting for the fine print to arrive. This is for the GE Aerospace engines deal. So there's often a slip between the cup and the lip. And many great initiations like these, the visuals that we are seeing, seem to be a great kickstart. Many of them get into overdrive, but many of them also end up being dud deals.
Dud deals fail to deliver, may not materialize.
They fail to even reach a contractual stage.
Absolutely, but all in all, I think a good show there, a good show that boosts morale here in India and hopefully also in the US. And in a signaling of a greater partnerships between the two countries. We will of course have to wait and watch out for how many of those deals will actually materialize on paper in years to come.